Welcome to English Language Academy. The Proud Rose, English Story Chapter 1, The Garden's Secret. Once upon a time, in a lush and vibrant garden, there grew a young rose bush. Among its branches, a single bud began to bloom, revealing the most beautiful rose the garden had ever seen. Her petals were the softest pink, her scent was sweet and enchanting, and she stood tall, basking in the admiration of all who passed by. "Look at me," said the rose, her voice proud and melodious. "I am the most beautiful flower in this entire garden." The other flowers whispered among themselves. The daisies, the lilies, and even the bright marigolds looked at the rose with a mix of awe and annoyance. "She is indeed lovely," murmured a daisy, "but beauty is not everything." The rose heard this and turned her head away. "They are jealous," she thought. "They do not understand what it is like to be admired by everyone." Nearby, an old oak tree listened to the rose's words. "Beauty is fleeting, little one," he said gently. "What matters is the kindness you show and the love you share." The rose huffed. "You only say that because you are old and covered in rough bark. What could you know of beauty?" The oak tree said no more, but his deep roots trembled with sorrow. He had seen many seasons and many roses come and go. He knew that the rose's pride would bring her lessons. He could only hope she would learn them with grace. Chapter 2. The Visitor. One sunny morning, a small bee buzzed into the garden. He was tired from his journey and looking for nectar. Spotting the rose, he flew over eagerly. "Good day, dear rose," said the bee. "May I gather some nectar from your lovely petals?" The rose lifted her head high. "I am too beautiful to be touched by a common bee. Go to the daisies or marigolds. They are plain and will not mind." The bee hesitated. "But Rose, sharing your nectar helps the garden grow. Without bees, the flowers cannot thrive." "That is not my concern," replied the rose coldly. "Go away." The bee sighed and flew off to the daisies, who welcomed him warmly. As he worked, the other flowers whispered to one another about the rose's unkindness. Chapter 3. The storm days turned into weeks, and the garden thrived under the summer sun. The rose continued to stand tall and proud, receiving compliments from visitors and basking in her beauty. But one evening, dark clouds gathered on the horizon. The wind began to howl, and the first drops of rain fell. The garden braced itself for a storm. The rose shivered as the wind tugged at her delicate petals. "Oh no," she cried. "I cannot endure such a storm. My petals will be ruined." The old oak tree, sturdy and strong, bent his branches to shield the smaller flowers. "Hold on, little ones," he whispered. "This storm will pass." But the rose, too proud to ask for help, stood alone. The wind grew stronger, and her petals began to tear. She cried out in fear, but no one came to her aid. When the storm finally passed, the garden was quiet. The rose was no longer the most beautiful flower. Her petals were tattered and her stem was bent. She wept softly, feeling both ashamed and alone. Chapter 4. A Lesson in Kindness. The next morning, the sun rose, casting a golden light over the garden. The bee returned, humming a cheerful tune. He noticed the rose's damaged state and felt a pang of sympathy. "Good morning, Rose," he said kindly. "You look like you had a rough night." The rose turned away, embarrassed. "Why do you speak to me? I was cruel to you." The bee landed gently on a nearby leaf. "Because kindness is not about what you receive, but what you give. If you allow, I can help you heal." The rose hesitated, then nodded. The bee carefully gathered nectar from her remaining petals, and as he did, the rose felt a warmth she had never known. She realized that sharing her nectar was not a loss, but a gift that brought life to the garden. Over the days, the other flowers also came to check on the rose. The daisies, marigolds, and even the lilies offered their encouragement. Slowly, the rose began to bloom again, this time with a new understanding of beauty and kindness. Chapter 5. The Rose's Change. The rose no longer stood tall with pride but with gratitude. She welcomed the bees, butterflies, and even the occasional ant. She shared her nectar freely and listened to the stories of the other flowers. The old oak tree watched with a smile. "You have grown, little one," he said one evening. "I have," replied the rose. "I have learned that true beauty lies not in how you look, but in how you make others feel." And so, the rose became the heart of the garden, admired not only for her beauty but for her kindness and generosity. The garden thrived, and the rose found a joy deeper than any compliment could bring. The end. Thanks for watching English Language Academy. Subscribe now.